Karen and Robyn, how you doing?
Doing great.
We finally got this opportunity to get together and chat. I'm so glad that you're here. I've been looking at your website forever and using your material as a source for traffic safety information since I got into this role. So this is just awesome that we're finally getting to meet and do this and share all the information with you. You know, it's very exciting. For those who don't know what TIRF is, what is TIRF?
So the Traffic Injury Research Foundation is an independent road safety research institute, and we study the behaviors of people on the road. So we do a couple of different things in terms of measuring and monitoring trends in road crashes and risky behaviors, studying risky behaviors, and then most importantly, using the research from the evaluations that we do to help people like yourselves in all walks of life make better choices on the road and encourage others to make better choices.
And that sort of leads me into my next question is really who is your audience? Are you speaking to every road user? Are you looking to really be the source of information for professionals? Is it everybody?
Yeah, so we're a research institute. So a lot of our research is used to inform government decision-making and policy and practice. It also informs industry, the vehicle manufacturing industry, the insurance industry, and then nonprofit associations. A lot of our work is used for educational organizations and advocacy organizations to talk about what the research says. And then most importantly, people who use the road every day. There's a wealth of free resources on our website designed for them to share some of those key facts and tips.
And if you add coloring books, you've got the entire spectrum covered.
We do.
You do?
Those might be coming. Yeah. So my area is distracted driving, and through TIRF's Drop It and Drive program, which we're going to talk about on another episode, I think, focuses on education for kids right from kindergarten all through post-secondary and pretty much any industry you can think of. So you were right. We reach everyone. That's our goal. Our target audience is everyone.
And everyone needs this information. It's run in tune with what we do, which is talking to everyone on social media. So it's a great partnership. So one of the things we wanted to talk about when we were preparing for today was the last couple of years, things that are different or unique that we've seen as a result of the pandemic, just changes in behavior. What sort of things are you seeing at TIRF?
Well, for many years leading up to the pandemic, we saw a steady downward trend in road crashes, and we were making improvements in all areas, particularly the most significant risks such as speeding and impaired driving. So that general downward trend was true for all crashes, with the exception of perhaps distraction, which is one of the current and the priority issues. But since the pandemic and with the lower traffic volumes on the road, fewer cars, we have seen a very concerning increase in risk taking. And that's probably a function of a few things. People perceive there being less risk simply by virtue of the fact that there's fewer cars. And also people are tired of being confined, I guess, being at home. So when they're out, they also want to be out doing more walking, more cycling, anything that gets them outdoors. So the biggest increases in risk that we've seen on the roadway is actually with respect to speeding, with the extreme speeding, the stunt driving, the street racing that you've seen in Toronto and we've seen across the country, and also increases in distraction. So overall, significant change in behavior, and definitely one that warrants attention.
So it's a couple of things that stand out what you just said. So it seems to be an opportunity and a belief that that's safer to get away with it, and also that people want to stretch their legs and sort of feel that freedom, I guess, and do things that are exciting because they've been cooped up. So those are seem to be common, and we've talked about it, and people have mentioned it even on TikTok when we do our live shows, that they think it's okay, but it's not, obviously. And the government in Ontario has had to change laws to increase the consequences for behaviors like that. For instance, in September of 2021, they added harsher penalties for folks that were caught stunt driving. Instead of a 7-day impound and a 7-day suspension, it became a 14-day suspension and a 14-day I always mix these two up, a 14-day vehicle impound and a 30-day suspension. So significant increases in the consequences, all in the attempts and with the intention of reducing the acting out or the behavior. Do you think that there's been a change since these laws changed?
Oh, well, I think that increasing penalties certainly does get people's attention, and encourages them to make safer choices. But unfortunately, penalties don't change everyone's behavior. So those of us who are more likely to comply with new laws are those who self-select for safety and are less likely to speed, and certainly to speed at those levels. But I think the other important piece that we need not to lose sight of is the educational component. People are very much influenced by those around them, by people in their peer group. So for example, if I don't speed and I speak up to my peer group and talk about why I don't speed and why it's risky, they are also more likely not to speed. So my choices and my speaking up about them and why can influence others. So I think we need to definitely use that educational tool and really empower people and educate them about the risks so they can speak up. When you think about the extreme speeding, I think what we also forget is that it's not just extreme speeding that's risky. You don't have to be going 50 kilometers an hour to increase your risk. Just going 10 kilometers over the speed limit actually doubles your crash risk. And going 20 kilometers over the speed limit increases your crash risk sixfold.
Wow.
So we speed thinking that it's not a big deal, but in reality, those small increases in speed equal big increases in risk and also big increases in severity. And you see that every day.
Oh yeah. Now we get a lot of responses. We put up tons of videos, and have used some from from an Australian creator that talks about the consequences. And they're older videos, and the responses have always been the same. Well, these are old cars. My new car is safer. It's got airbags. It's got bembo brakes. It can stop on a dime. There's a belief that technology and advancements in vehicle design basically make it okay to do whatever you want, but it's not the case.
No, it's not the case. And I think what people underestimate is that some of those technologies require driver input. So if you're speeding and you're distracted and you hit the brakes, for example, a few seconds too late, yes, you have you certainly have ABS on your vehicle and maybe automatic emergency braking. But if you delay in hitting the brakes, then those brakes aren't triggered. And that's true for a number of safety features. The driver has to react in some way to trigger that. So I think we should not become over-reliant on technology, because at the end of the day, your brain is still your most important safety feature.
And there's so many things that go to distracting it. And I know we're going to do another episode about distraction, but one of the number one things that we see in terms of collisions is distractors, whether it be a cell phone or some other thing that is taking you away from the focus of driving. What do you say about distractions? Is that one of the major issues currently plaguing us, because whether it be pandemic related or just in general?
Yeah, definitely. It's still an ongoing issue. And one of the challenges in dealing with distracted driving, unlike speeding or alcohol impaired driving, where there's a measurement that can be taken. You're either doing the speed limit of 50 or you're doing 60, 70, 80, or 90. It's really defined about what it is you're engaging in. It's increasing that risk. But with distraction, it covers so many different things. Obviously, the phones are the most visual and easily identifiable and covered in our legislation across Canada. But there's a number of different forms of distraction. And one of the ones that's most underestimated is what's going on in our heads. It's the cognitive distraction. There's a couple of studies that came out of Erie Insurance down in the States, and they 5 years apart did a survey based on police reports. And the number one contributing factor to distracted driving fatal collisions was daydreaming.
Wow.
So I'm pretty sure, Sean, I haven't run into an officer yet who's handed out a daydreaming ticket. I can't imagine how that conversation would go roadside, but it's helping people understand that the behaviors that you're engaging in behind the wheel, if you haven't been in a crash, it's just you haven't been in a crash yet. It doesn't mean that behavior's safe. It just means you haven't had to pay the price, or sadly, someone else hasn't had to pay the price for that choice. So helping people understand, and one of the things I love about what TIRF does is we apply this research to the real world. We take everything that TIRF's been working on, the data they gather and all the research, and the analytics, and we put it in a format that is easily digestible, and it's relatable to people. If people can understand and put themselves in the place of someone talking about, for example, how many of us have walked from one room to the other in our home with purpose? You're in your bedroom, you're going to the kitchen, you have a mission, and you get there literally 5 seconds later and it's completely gone from your head. You have no idea what you're going there for, and you try and do that rewind thing and you just have no idea. So if that can happen in the safety of your home when you're wandering around in your PJs and your slippers, it certainly can be happening on the road, especially during the pandemic and everything that people are dealing with. We all have a lot on our minds. So it's just that much more important to realize when you get behind the wheel of a vehicle, everything needs to be engaged, not just your hands and your eyes, but your head as well.
Yeah, being focused on the task at hand. It is a job, and you're responsible for your safety and the safety of everyone around you when you're operating a motor vehicle. And I don't think, I do think something you said is really relevant, and that is just because you haven't had a problem doesn't mean it's safe. It's just that you haven't had a problem yet. We talk about speeding all the time, and the most common response is that I do it every day, and I haven't had a collision, so it must be okay. At least that's the target of their message when they make those comments. And I mean, it's great that they haven't had a collision yet or haven't killed anybody yet, but it could be just a matter of time. I was smiling a couple of times because you reminded me of an episode of The Simpsons. And I'm not a big Simpsons person, but there was an episode of Simpsons where he runs into his long-lost, or meets his long-lost brother. I think Danny DeVito played it, and they designed a car just for him. And Homer bankrupted the company, obviously, because it was a ridiculous car. But he basically created a driver compartment that was isolated. Couldn't talk to his wife, couldn't hear the kids. It was just the driver's compartment. And as much as that was a joke, that would probably be a much safer way to travel, because even if you're having a conversation inside your vehicle, it's less safe than focusing on what you're supposed to be doing.
Oh, exactly. And one of the things that comes up quite a bit is, well, does this mean I can't talk with people in my vehicle anymore? And people sometimes take it to the extreme. And it's like, of course you can engage with your passengers. But for me, as a mom, and my kids were going through school during new math, and math was never my favorite subject to begin with. And they would start rattling off something they learned in class that day. And I immediately knew I can't even listen to what it is you're saying, because I'm trying to navigate this intersection. It's kind of similar to how those of us who might be willing to admit to it, when you pull into a busy parking lot or a tricky situation, and you somehow decide that you have to turn down your music to be able to see better, that's your head letting you know you can only take in so much information. So if you have passengers and they're acting as your second set of eyes and ears, that's brilliant. They're able to see what's going on in the vehicle with you, and they're able to know when they have to keep quiet so you can focus on driving, or point out something that maybe you didn't see. But for those people who are legally allowed to use, say, hands-free devices while driving, it's important to remember the person who's on the other end of that phone, not in the vehicle with you, they're not your second set of eyes and ears. They're just going to keep talking, and it's going to be really a lot more challenging for you as the driver to shut that down and engage all your senses on handling whatever risk has appeared, and everything happens just in the fraction of a second.
Right. And I think people really underestimate that. So driving in and of itself is a divided attention task, which means there's manual, there's visual, and there's cognitive, the thinking part, components to driving. So when you're driving, you're already dividing your attention across those three tasks. And we often hear the same. I drive the same route every day. So you expect that drive to be the same. But the reality is the road is different every day. Today there's school buses, tomorrow there's cyclists, the day after that there's some construction. And it's really just that split second of inattention where you miss those hazards as they emerge. And if you're distracted, you've completely lost your ability to respond. So trying to continue to be vigilant and pay attention in order to be prepared for that moment of unexpectedness. And that's what it means when you're driving. When you haven't had a crash yet, it just means you haven't had something unexpected happen in front of you and not been prepared for it. So I think it's a misperception we really need to overcome.
We are such creatures of habit, regardless of what we're doing. People don't recognize that they probably park in the same parking spot, if they can, every day, regardless of what other spots are available. We do things automatically. And part of that is a belief that we can multitask, and we can't actually multitask, at least not in the way that people think. It's more linear than that. We're switching between tasks. And I want to leave things for another episode, but there's so much to talk about when it comes to distracted and safety in all areas. So we could go on for hours and hours, I'm sure. But going back to this pandemic concept, where there's an opportunity or perceived opportunity that you can get away with doing something safely because there's fewer cars on the road, or again, because people are breaking out and trying to find some source of fun, even at the expense of safety. Is this something you think is going to go away? Just go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to say one of the things I'd love drivers to think about when they're driving is if you've ever been through an exercise called a trust fall. When you get behind the wheel of a vehicle and you're choosing to say speed, you're engaging in that higher speed with the belief system that everyone else on the road is going to behave predictably. They're going to do what they're supposed to do. They're going to indicate before they change lanes, or they're not going to have the indicator going right, but the wheels are left. And so they suddenly go left, not realizing they're indicating right. So you're actually looking at driving from the perspective of believing everyone else on the road is going to behave exactly as they should so that you can speed. I don't know about you. I don't do well with trust falls outside of my own family group. So I'm not going to put that trust in every other driver or even other road user on the road that they're going to do the right thing just so I can do a higher speed.
Yeah. And I think when it comes to the pandemic, that's really the biggest concern is people have been increasing their risk taking and they've become comfortable doing that. So the big concern is that risk taking is going to remain. And we've kind of see that looking at the difference between 2020 and 2021. We've seen, again, the increase in risk taking, even though traffic volumes are not near as low in 2021 as compared to 2020. So I think it means we need a concerted effort to help people understand that the choices they're making are not safe, and really to encourage them to do better. You know, driving's rote behavior, we're comfortable doing it, but it's just that split second of inattention. And the difference between a near miss and a crash is measured in millimeters and milliseconds. And what we should never lose sight of is the fact that you can't take it back. When you've been in a crash and you've injured someone, particularly all the pedestrians and the cyclists and the moped riders that we have out, the e-scooters, you don't get to take that back. And we need to keep that top of mind when we're driving.
Well, you know, very often drivers think that it's everyone's responsibility but theirs. You know, that there's everything is going to work itself out as long as they're being safe. And the perception of what's safe is obviously flawed for many people, but that they are being safe because they are skilled, they are better. They're part of the I'm a Great Driver Club. The problem is they elected themselves president of that club, not really having any, real fair or partial judging before electing themselves. So people do things that they believe are safe, again, because they haven't had a problem doing it. It's just become okay, or their dad or mom or some person was an example doing it. And I've talked about this with my friend Scott Marshall, who's a driving instructor. We are unknowingly or always teaching our offspring, our little eyes in the back by example. We're showing them what's okay, and then it carries on to the next generation. But I can tell you that my kids are very quick to tell me that they think I'm doing something wrong. In fact, it happens on a regular basis. They may not be correct, but they do tell me what they think all the time.
No, and research shows that actually, that and I think it's important for adults who have children to understand that that doesn't magically start at the age of 15 just before they start learning to drive. That actually starts at a very, very young age. And if a parent does not wear their seatbelt, if their parent speeds, if they use their cell phone or engage in other types of risks, odds are their child who's watched that behavior for a number of years growing up in the car with them driving is going to model that. And I think, Karen, your approach with Kylie and with Connor in the vehicle from a young age is really, what we would strive for as parents.
So what Robyn is talking about is when I'll go into a school or a organization and do a presentation, and nothing will make people's jaws drop faster when I announce that I've been teaching my kids how to drive since they knew how to speak. It's like, no, not behind the wheel of the vehicle. But I was crash involved driving through an intersection when I was 19, got T-boned by someone who ran the red light. So I got a very early, very harsh lesson that green doesn't necessarily mean go. Not everybody on the road is going to do what they are supposed to do according to the laws of the road. So fast forward a number of years having kids, really as soon as they could communicate, I started teaching them about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, and sometimes more importantly, why I'm not doing something as soon as they could communicate. Once they were old enough, the cell phone, it got handed off to them and they could be in charge of the music. I listened to some really funny stuff, but you know what? I didn't need it, but I wanted them more importantly to understand this is not the priority while I'm driving. My priority while I'm driving is to get all of us and everyone else on the road from point A to point B safely. So we'd come up to a stop sign, and as they were older, they'd understand the concept of, who goes first, depending on who's there first. But every now and then I wouldn't go, even though I was there first, because I knew the other person was going to go. But I'd engage the kids in those conversations for years. So at the point, my daughter Kylie's 19 going on 20. So she's gone through the young driver program, and my son's coming up to turning 16 in May. And so he's about to start, and they've already been exposed to so many elements of driving, let alone the fact I work in road safety and they know many people who work in road safety and are police officers. But just by being in the vehicle with their dad and I, we've talked about what it is we're doing and why we're doing it, and really empowered them to take ownership of being in the vehicle, whether they're the driver or the passenger. And I have always told them, as a passenger, you have the right and the responsibility to speak up if you feel unsafe. It has nothing to do necessarily with the driver's abilities, but I don't care if it's me, your dad, grandparents, whoever. If what they're doing makes you uncomfortable, your life is literally in their hands. So respectfully, you can speak up and say, you know what, can you just maybe leave a little more distance between us and the vehicle in front? And I think it's made a big difference. It certainly made us feel more confident that they're going to be safe as passengers, but also safer as drivers.
And it's good if they feel comfortable telling you, then hopefully they'll be comfortable telling a friend when they're old enough to be out on their own. Well, for mine, I'm thinking mine are much younger. But I want them to feel comfortable telling me that I'm doing something wrong. And then we can deliberate and determine whether I am in fact breaking any rules. Because I can be doing 40 and a 40, like, Dad, you're going really fast. No, I'm not.
Right.
They get me worried.
I think to your point, Sean, that the speaking up part is the hardest, not just for young people, but also for adults, right? You always kind of feel that pressure to not rock the boat. And it's difficult for us to want, to have the courage to speak up. And the reality is doing it the first time is hard. But once you do it a few times, you find out that it's actually easy. And I imagine most people respectfully, respond in terms of, yeah, I'll slow down, or yes, I'll put my phone down. So I think the first time speaking up is the hardest part, and also for adults. And we need to overcome that and do it once or twice, and then it really becomes normal, and it's much easier to do.
And one of the great ways I found of overcoming that nervousness, because I'm pretty introverted. A lot of what I've done over the last 11 years presenting is outside of my comfort zone, but it's that gem of data or research. It's that little nugget of information that you can open the conversation with. So I've traveled a lot for work, and taken a lot of public transportation and cabs. And when you see a driver pull out their phone or do something that is against the law and risky, it's a lot easier to start that conversation with did you know that when you're engaging in this is what happens to your field of view? And if you can do it in a way that you're actually sharing information to help them get home safe every day as well, and ideally they'll take home to their families. And so it just kind of softens the blow a little bit for those of us who are a little more introverted, to just have that little nugget of information to start the conversation.
As a young, when I was about to say as a young person, when I was young, I just drove everywhere myself because I didn't want to be put in a position where I had to rely on somebody else to be responsible. I wanted to be responsible and maintain that control, so I became the control freak who drove everywhere. But I totally appreciate that it is difficult for people, especially young people, to voice out and say something that isn't fun, cool, or popular. And telling someone to slow down is definitely not something that's going to, necessarily get them cool factor points, because there seems to be an association with speed and fun and excitement. But living a long life is really exciting, I think. That's a whole different thing. If you had to pick one particular topic, and the problem is we talk about the big four all the time in Toronto. The speeding, the aggressive driving, the distracted driving, and impaired driving as being the big things that lead to, or most often lead to serious injury and death on our roads. But if you had to pick one as being the most concerning right now, what would you point at?
I think definitely speed. I think more people speed more often than they think they do. Mm-hmm. I think, again, the widespread misperception that doing 10 or 20 over is not a big deal. And I think that's upped with the lower traffic volume. So I think right now speed is really one of the most concerning factors on the road. And, there's been a lot of discussion about, raising speed limits versus lowering speed limits. So a lot of the argument in support of raising speed limits are actually not supported by research. And I can tell you that in jurisdictions around the world, wherever they have increased speed limits, including certain places here in Canada, crashes and fatalities have also increased. That is a universal outcome. There is a big focus on lowering speed limits, particularly to 30 and 40 in busy areas and in urban areas and school zones, because when a pedestrian or a cyclist is struck, unfortunately, at a lower speed, it's always unfortunate when they're struck. When they're struck at a lower speed, they're more likely to survive, whereas they're struck, at 50 or higher, they're more likely to be killed. Mm-hmm. So, the reality is speed kills, and I think that's one of the biggest factors on our road. More than 300 people die every year in Canada as a result of speed.
It's amazing that every time I talk about speed killing, they say, no, it's not speed. It's the rapid deceleration, where it's not the person speeding that's at fault. It's the people who are driving the speed limit. They're the risk. It's amazing how the story can be twisted to support an illegal activity of exceeding the speed limit. And it's something that challenges me on a regular basis, creating content to address speed. But I'm glad that I can send them to TIRF to read, because they of course, everyone wants to see stats and quotes or uses the Autobahn as the number one justification for speeding. Well, it works in Germany. It's okay there. Speaking of the Autobahn, what would you say about that? I know what I say, but I'm...
Yeah. Well, I think that's a whole other conversation. But I think the reality is one of the most poignant comments I heard with respect to speed was actually by another police officer with the Victoria Police Service or Victoria Police Department. He said, speeding is illegal, and if someone broke into a store and stole something, that doesn't mean it's okay for everyone else to do that. And it's the same with speeding. And when you're speeding, the roads are designed to be driven at a particular speed. They're engineered for that. And you're forcing, you're almost pushing other people who are comfortable driving the speed limit to drive faster, which is not safer for them. So those speed limits are in place for a reason. And then those speed limits actually are really the maximum speed when you have bad weather. I mean, in Canada, we get all kinds of bad weather. You get freezing rain, you get fog, you get snow, you get high wind, whatever. You should lower your speed further below the speed limit to drive according to the conditions. And I mean, the biggest misperception is people think they're going to get there faster.
Oh, yeah.
And that's the biggest myth that there is. You might save seconds, at best minutes, but you have dramatically, exponentially increased your crash risk and the likelihood that you will kill and injure yourself, your passengers, or someone else on the road in your effort to get there on time. It's not worth the risk.
And time is sorry, go ahead.
So I was going to say, back to your comparison with the Autobahn. I've heard it a lot. I'm originally from the UK, and I think what maybe might help people to wrap their heads around comparing something that works in an entirely different country and culture, and then trying to apply it to Canada is just look at how some Canadians try and navigate roundabouts.
Oh my.
Roundabouts are very efficient in England,
Europe.
and all across Europe and many other European countries. But in Canada, I don't know what it is. It doesn't apply the same way. So I think for me, that's usually where my head goes when I see people pulling up the Autobahn flag. And saying, yeah, but you know what? Roundabouts.
Yeah, simple things that are not simple.
About how fast people actually drive on the Autobahn. It's not a free-for-all. There are some parameters around it. There are certain sections within which that's possible, but it's not the free-for-all that people perceive it to be.
Yeah, in the Autobahn and in the populated areas, my understanding is the speed limits range from 80 to 130 kilometers, and they're strictly enforced. Behavior is not acceptable when it's outside the lines. And on the areas and stretches that are without any speed limits, when collisions do occur, the debris fields are enormous. They are major problems when things go wrong. So it's not as simple as the Autobahn excuse is made out to be. There is this belief that if everyone went faster, we just get there faster, and it doesn't work because there's so much else that we add to the mix. And I often hear another excuse that our roads were designed for faster, speeds, and only because of the gas shortage years ago did we reduce the speed. So really, it should at very least be no. Slower is not.
Speed equals crash risk, right? Speed equals severity of injuries and fatalities. That's the law of physics, and you cannot beat the law of physics.
Well, and I think many of us have experienced where there's somebody speeding and they're switching lanes back and forth, and a traffic light ahead, there they are, right beside you as you pull up, having done the speed limit the whole way. I don't think I've met anyone yet who hasn't experienced that, so that really debunks that myth for me.
Something that's amazing to me is people tend to when driving, and I can everyone I've ever driven with is yelling and screaming and cursing under their breath about how bad everybody else on the road is. And you want to speed through that? Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And I think people don't want to listen to themselves. they take that out and ignore the fact that you're driving, and if you're the only person there, maybe it would be okay. Because you look at a racetrack in an empty, controlled environment, speeding is less dangerous because of the unforeseen. Not to mention the fact a race-tuned car in perfect conditions. But that aside, you're alone, and there's medical crews standing by. But when you're dealing with all the unknown and the heap that's held together with duct tape, and the other car there whose driver's clearly on the cell phone and about to change lane, there's so many risks.
Right. And I just want to speak to the point you made about on your own, because I've heard that before a lot as well, especially to do with distracted driving and some of the organizations that we talk to. I'll hear like, well, I'm off on the Forest Service Road by myself, so what's the issue with going a little fast or staying connected to my family? And I looked this one person dead in the eye and I just said, don't you think it might hurt your family though if you don't come home?
Yeah.
What about you? So even those people that might take that belief system like, oh, it's the middle of the night, the road's empty, single vehicle collisions happen all the time. We have wildlife all across this country of ours. You cannot control your road environment, and things can go wrong with your vehicle. You can have a blowout or something. But just remembering, before you make that choice to increase your risk of collision, you matter too. You have to get home, because I guarantee you have people at home, friends and work, that will be devastated if you didn't come home.
For sure. We talk about guaranteed arrival. That's part of our police training. And, trying to get somewhere faster, even to save a life, only it makes sense if you get there. So if you're doing something that's dangerous and you don't make it to save somebody, not only is there a patient or someone in need of help, now there's two, because you're one of them. And now you're dividing police resources and medical resources, emergency services. Yeah, these are things people don't consider. And when I talk about on your own, I really meant a closed track with a race car and
all the training and all the good stuff.
where you're doing nothing because there's not even a stereo installed in your vehicle. That's a very different situation than just being alone on a night on a road, like you said, with wildlife. I met someone years ago who drove through a moose on a Harley Davidson. It wasn't a planned event, and he was lucky. Even though I think he broke every bone in his body, he was lucky to be alive. I had a bunch of questions that I wanted to ask, and we've sort of talked about this already. But if you could make one change, and obviously, yeah, that change can't be magically everything is safe and we're all covered by spongy safety nets. But if you were going to make one change to make the roads safer, whether that be a law or a behavior that was simply eradicated, what do you think it would be?
Oh, that's a tough question.
It's supposed to be.
I don't want it to just be one. Does it have
I
to just be
know.
one? There's a long list.
I can tell you what would make a significant difference is if every time anyone who went to get in their car, who got on their bike, who stepped off the curb, who in the moment of doing that took a moment to think about, I'm not willing to die to get to my destination. Other people's lives are in my hands, and I'm going to make the safe choice. I think we need that daily reminder every time we use the roads about the consequence of risk, and our choices and how they have life-altering impacts. So, every time I get in my car, those are two things that I think about. One, I'm not willing to die to get to my destination, and two, my choices today on the road matter. They matter for me, they matter for my family, they matter for my coworkers, and they matter for everyone else out there using the road with me.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think for me, because I've had personal interactions with my own collisions, and then when my daughter was hurt, it's that personal accountability, remembering that the data that you'll see on the TIRF site and the research and all that, they're not just numbers. Those are people. Those are people who have people who care about them. And when you're climbing behind, like Robyn said, behind the wheel of that vehicle, you're stepping off the curb, or you're throwing your leg over your bicycle, or getting ready to e-scoot somewhere, making choices that ensure that you don't become one of those numbers, but also that no one else becomes one of those numbers. Because I think it would be a very different conversation if a collision happened and you injured or killed somebody, if you were the one who had to go to the door and deliver the news that police officers sadly have to deliver. I think that would just change people's perspective a little bit when they could look someone in the eye and know you can't justify that choice because of the outcome.
We often think about everyone else's driving on the road. To your point, Sean, we complain about the other drivers we see out there. The reality is the only person on the road that you control is yourself. And we do have the responsibility to make those safe choices. And if we spent more time thinking about our own choices on the road, because that also, and speaking up about them, because then that does also change other people's behavior.
I think what you said with this concept of considering the fact that you're responsible for yourself and everybody else when you get behind the wheel of that vehicle. Every police officer around the world, when they put their uniform on, makes a acknowledgement of some kind that they're not invincible, that this might be the last time they see their family, that they, when they kiss their spouses or their children goodbye, that it might be for the last time. And it's haunting. And I've never actually put the connection to getting into a car and simply driving, but it's exactly the same thing. And it's the part of being a police officer that people say, well, that's scary. Well, driving should be a little bit scary when you consider the fact that it could be that final, and no airbag and safety strap or better functioning bumper system is going to protect you every time. So the risk is real, whether it's an altercation that takes an officer's life or it's a collision. And I'll tell you, more often than not, police officers die in motor vehicle collisions. Right. So the reality is, it is a serious situation. Driving is not just a thing to do.
Right. And it's, one of the leading causes of death, if you think about the things that we're afraid of, car crashes is usually not there at the top of the list. But the reality is you are much more likely to be killed in a car crash than many of the other things that you fear, which are, very low odds of ever happening.
So alien invasions not happening, mutant mosquitoes.
I'm thinking Jaws. My head goes straight to Jaws.
It's the Jumanji. I don't know if
you drain and eating you. Yeah, none of those things are
I always think of Jumanji when the mosquitoes were, going
oh
through.
My gosh.
That's like the freakiest thing I can think of, and that's not happening tomorrow. But you know what? I was involved in 2 motor vehicle collisions in 2018. Almost 6 months to the day apart. One was on a motorcycle, one was in a car with my family, and both of them were I was very fortunate. It could have been much, much worse. It wasn't good, but it could have been much worse. And that's my quota. I hope to be collision free for the rest of my days, because I don't want to repeat any of what's gone on since then. But I think sorry, go ahead.
So I was going to say, I've been hit 3 times. I've been hit by an older woman who shouldn't have been driving, who had just been released from the hospital having had a stroke. I was hit by a young driver, and I was hit by a distracted driver. And I was fortunate all of those times, but it does show the reality of it can happen. It can happen to everyone. It
can happen to anyone. And somebody is something as simple as sitting on a bus stop waiting for a bus. A vehicle could change your life for the rest of time, or end your life for that matter. So whether you're a pedestrian, a cyclist, any kind of road user, and they're all road users, vulnerable or not. Well, they're all vulnerable, but you can't pick your moment. But reducing your odds, or increasing your odds of having a safe day, and being part of a community of safe drivers is really and safe road users. I shouldn't say drivers, because you know what, you can be a safe pedestrian, you can be a safe cyclist, you can choose what you do to be safer.
Sean, when you mentioned that, the climbing the vehicle, that one moment can change your life. And like Robyn, I'm a 3-time crash survivor. But in addition to that, I've received a phone call from crash scenes involving my family members twice now. My daughter when she was 8, and my parents a few years ago who were retired here on the island. And getting the phone call from the crash scene, and you're not there, and you can't do anything to change what happened, except to keep doing what we're doing and trying to get people on board with all of those collisions: speed, impaired driving, drug impaired driving, alcohol impaired driving, distracted driving. Every single one of those collisions is 100% preventable through our choices. So I just couldn't encourage people more to just really think about everything we've talked about, and recognize you literally have the power in the palm of your hand to save someone's life every time you get behind that wheel. A choice that you've made or not made, you probably won't even know how it turned out differently, because you didn't have that collision, because you made the right choices. And I don't want anybody to get those calls that I got. I don't want people to, get the visit at the front door that you guys have to do, or definitely 3's my max. I don't want to be hit anymore. So I just think it's really important for people to recognize that it doesn't take much to save a life.
For sure. And I wrote it down as you said it, feeling powerful. Well, you can feel powerful by making good decisions to keep people safe. That's power. Feeling power by going fast is actually going to the brink of powerlessness. I didn't say that very smoothly, but
like I said, the trust fall, right? Yeah. You're putting all your trust in other drivers.
But even to trust yourself, I mean, it's a lot of responsibility, and the consequences are enormous. I mean, never mind the fact that you could kill somebody, or that responsibility that. It's not taken seriously in the way it should. Well,
like Robyn said, you can't take it back.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, I got to work on this feel powerful concept, because there's something there. This has been amazing. I'd love to keep talking. I can't. I've got to get going, but we got to do this again. And there's so much that we can talk about. And I know that the people that watch our channel, and this will be available in clips on TikTok and other platforms, this will create a lot of conversation. So from that, I'm sure we'll have lots to discuss again. But thank you very much for spending time with me today and chatting about traffic safety. And I look forward to sending everybody on the planet to come look at TIRF, giving up my good source for traffic safety information. But you know what? It's better shared. So thanks again.
You do a great job sharing it, Sean.
Thank you very much.
It was very enjoyable. Thank you so much for having us on, and we do look forward to returning again.
Absolutely. We'll do it soon. Have a great day. And for everyone who's watching, TIRF.ca, TIRF.ca is your source for information when it's not me. but seriously, and you're also is it also TIRF on Twitter? And what are your socials?
Canada on Twitter. I'll make sure you've got all the URLs, and
we'll put it on
LinkedIn
screen
and Instagram.
It'll be like there. We'll put it on screen.
Nice, because you have the technology.